you suspect your neighbor might be not from around here? Like you, we here at Sinister Minutes are deeply concerned about the influx of so-called visitors on our streets and in our cities. While the federal government strives to control this invasion, we've been racking our brains trying to come up with a more immediate means of helping with this monumental effort. Introducing the official Sinister Minutes Alien DNA Tracker. Finally, a solution to the intergalactic influx of, well, them. The Sinister Minutes Alien DNA Tracker uses cutting-edge xenogenetic sequencing to identify any traces of alien life. Just point the curvy, flexible tracker wand at any suspicious individual, house, or place of business. Hell, even crop circles. Press the on switch and the tracker springs to life, humming in your hand as it instantly analyzes the DNA and compares it to our extensive database of known alien species. If alien DNA is detected, the associated app instantly shoots off a barrage of texts and automated phone calls to every possible Homeland Security office. Because here at Sinister Minutes, we believe it's best to alert them all. You'll gain peace of mind, knowing who's really living next door and, at the same time, ensuring that federal ICE employees all have something productive to do. Detect alien infiltration before it's too late with the Sinister Minutes Alien DNA Tracker. May cause paranoia, existential dread, and overwhelming urge to build a bunker. Results are not guaranteed. Please note that we're still working on the alien database. Use responsibly. Do not use Sinister Minutes Alien DNA Tracker for any purpose other than as directed, no matter how good it feels. Sinister Minutes is not responsible for any accidental encounters with actual aliens. Further side effects may include unfounded suspicions, increased government surveillance, and a sudden interest in tinfoil headwear. Sinister Minutes is reasonably certain that the alien DNA Tracker actually does something. We haven't actually tested it, but you can trust us. Got a minute or two? We have a way to make it not okay. Welcome to Sinister Minutes. I'm your host, writer and storyteller Kurt Homan. Next to me is the master of macabre musical musings, the maestro of mood, Tim Parker. Together, let us take you on a journey into the dark heart of disturbing. Sinister Minutes. It's not okay. Sinister Minutes features tales that include disturbing content. That's intentional because, like the podcast itself, the creators here at Sinister Minutes are really not okay. Now, having said that, realize that content featured on this podcast may include descriptions of some pretty horrific things at times. It is a dark fiction podcast, after all. So we hope that you are anticipating some degree of abuse and blood, of harm and death, of suicide, of sex, of injury, of mutilation, of pain, and certainly some profanity. Maybe a little bit of screaming, occasionally some threats, a bit of torture, a bit of victim blaming. And as always, at some point, we're sure that you're going to encounter some witches. Don't say we didn't warn you. Welcome to Sinister Minutes, Season 2, Episode 16. Today's episode features a fairy tale, the sort of thing that might have been inspired by our old friends, Jakob and Wilhelm, the Brothers Grimm. You know, those delightful fellows who captured the most lurid, bloody, and disgusting folk tales from the ever light-hearted 19th century Germans, and repackaged them as bedtime stories for small children. As you can imagine, we here at Sinister Minutes have a strong appreciation for that sort of thing. Anyway, This tale, Duet, isn't a grim piece, but by the end we think they'll be crawling out of their graves to check it out. After that, Tim's got a dark, grim composition of his own to share, something he hopes will disturb you as much as it has us. He calls it The Knife. Thanks as always for listening, for supporting what we're doing, for sharing Sinister Minutes with anybody who still talks to you, for hitting the like icon wherever you listen to us, for subscribing so you don't miss a single one of our delectable episodes. And please visit us at sinisterminutes.com, where you'll find links to all the episodes, places to subscribe, juicy bits about us, and even a submission form. If you've written a tale and want us to consider narrating it on the show, a tale that makes us all feel not okay. Duet, written and narrated by Kurt Homan. Otherworldly notes trilled through a morning mist that shrouded the heath in an earthbound cloud. No other sound competed. Princess Jamie turned from the window. The musician was out there, invisible. She'd never spied him for all the time she'd risen early and dashed to the parapet. The music reached her ears as if he were directly below, but the mist hid his form, and by the time it cleared, he left no sign. The music, though, flowed through her mind, tingled under her skin, rustled her hair. Jamie sighed. The life of a princess, her life, was the envy of all. Friends, admirers, they were always at hand, yet she couldn't explain to them about the music, about the way the notes emerging from that magical flute so filled her with delight. She clutched her pillow as she sat on her bed, the light of dawn filling her room with golden hues as the music faded, the morning songs of the birds replacing the notes of the flute. The mist was lifting. She knew without even looking. It was always the way. When the sun rose and the day began with heat or wind, no music raised her from slumber. It was only under cover of mist that he serenaded her to the world of the living. He had to be a prince, she said to herself in the mirror as she brushed her long golden hair. She was certain of it. Who else could play so beautifully? What other soul could possibly touch her own? Shy, no doubt, but a prince nonetheless. Her prince. And one day, soon, he would come for her, fulfill her vision of him. He would play for her every day, seducing her with the charms of his music. He would whisk her away from the ever-damp river valley where she lived, take her back to his own kingdom. She would miss home, but only a little. There was more to the world than the cold, damp castle walls surrounding her. He would show her that world. Together, she told her reflection, they would travel to wild places, encounter strange animals, and no doubt stranger people. But she would never know fear, for he would play his flute and charm them all, much as he did her. In the music, everything was possible. Her whole life would change, begin anew, as soon as he came for her. "Jamie," her younger brother called from outside her door. "Breakfast!" She finished dressing, and after checking her appearance once more, trudged into the corridor. Another ordinary day lay ahead. Longing for more of the music that had faded into silence, she trod down the stairs. "Good morning!" Her mother, the queen, was ready for the business of the day, attired in her fine regalia. "Morning, princess," said the king, resplendent in his own royal garb. Before her place-setting sat a long, narrow box tied with a bright red ribbon. The mystery musician, her sweet as yet unseen prince, he'd sent her roses. Eagerly she tore into the box, barely noticing her parents' expectant faces. No flowers awaited her inside. Instead, wrapped carefully in a cloth of regal purple velvet, was a shining silver flute. Of course, he wanted her to play, that they might play together. The music they could bring to life together would be— "You've shown a lot of interest in music lately," said the queen, "and then this practically dropped into our laps." "We've hired an excellent tutor," said the king. "You're gonna suck so bad," said her brother. Brothers could always be counted on to ruin even the best of dreams. She ate her eggs and toast in silence as her father straightened his tie and left for work. Then her mother dragged her brother off to drive him to summer camp. Alone at last, magical flute under her arm, she headed back toward her room. The painted walls of the townhouse stairwell gave way to the cold stone of the castle as she got closer to her room. By week's end, Jamie had begun to believe her brother was right. Her heir seemed destined for any place except the flute. When sounds did emerge, they were more squeak than note, more wobble than tone. Her tutor, a strict elderly woman who had seemingly lost any ability to smile during her tenure as a world-famous composer, pushed her to practice more each day, until she felt as though she had forsaken everything else in life save the damnable flute. "You really don't need to practice more than a half-hour at a time," said the woman, who was in fact neither elderly, famous, nor humorless. "You're just getting started." Under her tutor's suggestion, both spoken aloud and in Jamie's head, she played before her mirror, trying to see whether she could achieve with her mouth what the woman called the perfect embouchure. Whether her lips were too tight or too relaxed, she could not fully tell, but what emerged from the flute remained as much breath as music. Throughout, her prince continued to greet her on foggy mornings, his notes pure and fueled with feeling, even as hers later in the day remained hissy and choked with frustration. One day, near the end of the second week, his playing changed. A series of 8 notes, then a pause, a repeat of those same notes, then another pause. It was a message. He wanted her to respond to his call. She stood by her bedroom window, her fingers pantomiming the notes as he played them, until she was certain she had them locked in her mind. That afternoon, ignoring the practice her tutor had assigned, she worked instead before the mirror on perfecting those notes. She prayed for a foggy morning, and the gods of weather soon granted her wish. Somewhere far below her window, he played the notes, and she answered in kind. Again he played them, and again she answered. Their notes were distinct, his clear and penetrating, hers breathy and hollow, yet they blended. Jamie was ecstatic. It was what she'd been working toward. She was good enough to return his musical call. Would he at last step forward, show his face, allow her to join him in more ways than this game of notes? She envisioned hope in the foggy morning, and, as if in answer, a bright sliver of greenish light emerged far distant from where the sun would soon appear. As the mists lifted, the notes from below faded as always, and she allowed her own to drop as well. The silence was profound. As sunlight brightened the world, no birds or insects filled the void left by their duet. The sun rose fast and warm the next few days, and no mist swirled around the grounds. Jamie applied herself to practicing her flute, her reflection looking more proficient with each passing day, and even her tutor reacted with something more positive than her usual haughty frown. When Jamie felt the morning chill on her face and bounded from her bed, certain of the weather, she was rewarded by lovely notes from below. It was a new melody, but one that once again called for her to respond. And she did. More confident now, she soon echoed the notes from below, his notes, softly at first, then louder. He trilled, and she picked up on what he was doing and matched it. Once more she saw the sliver of green light that cut through the fog like a sharp knife, wider and more inviting. What had once been a serenade, a one-sided musical performance, had shifted from soliloquy to dialogue, from speech to conversation. Over the coming weeks they played back and forth, him asking questions in his melodies and her answering. The strange green light growing larger and brighter each time they played was a certain omen of them growing closer, of the time for them meeting at last growing nearer. If only she could not merely parrot his notes back to him, but enhance them, improve and improvise on them, it would be what drew him out of the mist at last, make him come to her as a man of flesh and blood. And so she redoubled her efforts, pushing her tutor for more advanced techniques, more challenging and complex music. Practice sessions now extended through the day and well into the night. Meals were missed and studies neglected. Old friends rarely saw her, and when they did, she spoke only of the music. Several weeks went by with no morning mist. Days when the rain fell from the sky and washed the castle walls. Others when the sun rose early and hot in the east. She sat by her open window regardless, playing her flute and letting the notes caress the landscape. Surely he was biding his time nearby. Surely he would hear her playing and emerge at last, her prince come to claim his princess. He did not. The next time the morning fog was thick, Jamie rose quickly, feeling the damp against her face and hearing the first strains of song even before she drew back the curtains. He played for several minutes, a melody that made her shiver in spite of the warm cloak she'd pulled across her shoulders. It resonated in her bones as her lips awaited his cue, and when at last he broke from the song, she slipped in. Her melody was no mere reflection of his, but an extension, a variation on a theme that held the song in its embrace even as she put her own mark on it. Her flute's tone was colder than silver, sharper than sorrow. She played the refrain, her breath trembling through the instrument with each repetition. Their notes intertwined, harmony weaving into something larger, stranger, hungrier. The castle walls hummed like a massive singing bowl. The music held Jamie, body and soul, taking control and using her as the instrument. She felt her prince's breath inside hers, his hands guiding her fingering. It was no longer a duet, but a binding. She took the lead, then relinquished it to him, and finally the notes of both flutes intertwined and harmonized in their cadence. In the thickness of the fog, she could see little outside her window, but felt the music flowing in and out and all around, encompassing her world. The song went on, and it became unclear whether it was the fog which kept it going or the music that held the fog in place. Far below, he increased the tempo, and she kept pace. Her notes were not so perfect as his. He'd had years to perfect his playing, and she only weeks. But together, his expertise and her more novice enthusiasm sounded like a symphony. A distant drum, or perhaps a fist against a door, tried to set an arrhythmic beat at her periphery, but she was able to ignore it, and it faded. Voices also rose and fell, but as they lacked any lyrical quality, she pushed those aside as well. Weeks earlier, Jamie would have felt her lower lip grow numb from playing so long and hard, but she'd grown accustomed to the technique, and her tutor had schooled her well. When daylight at last began to break through, the fog fighting hard but not hard enough, when she heard the decrescendo from below and matched it with her own, she knew something magical had happened. A bright green cast covered the world as the mist rose into the sky, forming a thick cloud cover, and she searched the open space beneath her window. Surely he would remain this time after all they had shared, his handsome face gazing up at her, magical flute held by his side. But the ground below remained empty, and she shook her head sadly. She dressed quickly, and with flute in hand, for she rarely went anywhere without it anymore, she opened her bedroom door and stepped out. Someone had been knocking at her door earlier, she felt sure of it, but the corridor was now empty. Flickering shadows on the dark walls seemed to dance in the weird green light pouring through the windows high overhead as she descended the cold stone stairs. The prospect of a hot meal made her realize how famished the longer than usual concert had left her, and at the dining room she threw wide the door. On a typical morning, the king sat resplendent in tailored suit and tie, while her mother, the ever-regal queen, sat at his right side, her own attire no less perfect. Her younger brother, ever ready with a cutting remark and likely as not to have spilled milk on his shirt, would have already taken her designated chair on the king's left, then argue with her about not wanting to move. This morning, though, was not typical. The places were set, the chairs pulled out, but no one sat at the table. The plates held half-eaten food. "Hello?" she called out, her voice reverberating in the large space. There was no answer. Shaking her head, Jamie left the dining area and headed toward the kitchen. Even if her family had finished eating and begun their days without her, surely someone had fixed her a plate. No one answered her call as she entered the kitchen. A pot of water bubbled on the stove top, while a bowl of eggs sat nearby, ready for poaching. Spying a loaf of bread, Jamie tore a chunk free and dipped it in a pot of honey, nibbling on it as she continued back out to the dining room. And there, in the doorway, stood a figure. The dress draped over her shoulders matched the one Jamie wore, so close in appearance that she looked down to ensure she'd put on the one she thought. When she looked up again, the differences became apparent. Her own was pristine, while the other's was torn in several places and stained with soot near the hem, as if it had been dragged through cinders. The figure's hair also mimicked her own. Like the dress, the long blonde locks appeared dirtier, as though adorned with ash. A mask covered the other's face, or perhaps a veil of some sort, a dark shadowy thing of spiderweb lace that moved with her breathing. "Hello?" Jamie raised one hand in tentative greeting. The other raised one as well. "Who are you?" She dropped her hand back to her side, and so did the other. She took one step forward, then back again, and the other again mirrored her movements. "Why are you in my home?" No response came from the other. On a whim, Jamie moved both hands to just below her neck, lifting the bottom of a veil that the other wore, but she did not. This time the other did not simply reflect her, but instead actually lifted her veil. Jamie gasped. A mass of tiny twisted branches and pointed leaves the color of soot emerged from the neckline of the other's dress and wrapped tightly around her face, leaving no indication of eyes or nose, of mouth or chin. "My God!" Jamie took a step back. "What happened to you?" This other, this shadowed reflection of herself, also took a step back, then pulled a flute from within the folds of her dress. Jamie felt her hands and arms following suit, as if moved by an unseen puppet master, her own silver flute exposed now in her hands, unbidden. The golden instrument shimmered as the other raised it to her face, and Jamie followed. She watched, dumbfounded, as the vines extracted their thorns from the lower half of the face, revealing blackened lips and skin the color of moonlight, both filled with bleeding sores. The other began to play, and Jamie found her own flute at her lips, her mouth forming the embouchure she'd practiced for so many weeks, her lungs moving the air through the instrument, giving birth once more to music. As the notes swirled, she knew it had been no prince, no potential suitor who had inspired her on foggy mornings. It had always been this strange, tortured shadow of herself, and she was quickly captured once more, mind and body. Jamie screamed inside, wanting nothing more than to toss the cursed instrument aside, to return to breakfast banter with her parents, to bickering with her brother. A return to normalcy, all the way back to the boring subdivision in which she'd created an imaginary kingdom and castle, crowning herself a princess in the process. Together at last, the two of them played in familiar concert, a perverse rendition of the hours Jamie had spent practicing before the mirror. Her notes meshed with those of the other, rising and falling in turn. Behind the tortured shadow of herself, the doorway no longer revealed the hallway. Its edges now glowing like green molten glass, it revealed silhouetted forms within, shadow figures that resembled impossibly tall people and misshapen beasts, some on 2 legs, some on many more. Horns emerged from a few skulls, others displayed wriggling snakes instead of hair. Their silhouettes moved past the doorway in a continuous parade, a danse macabre from some medieval painting come to life. The song rose and fell, cadence and rhythm interwoven. Images flew across Jamie's mind as she played, her family stepping through the portal to join the dance, then others following, nearby neighbors unable to withstand the allure. Her perception grew as she watched. That other realm, the one filled with green light and dancing shadows, had been opened by their duet, and the immense pull toward that opening grew stronger with each passing note. Her playing grew more breathy, the sound of a novice playing alongside a maestro, and she struggled to find the notes for even the simplest harmony. Her quick mastery of the instrument had been another illusion, and that talent, apparently no longer required, had been stripped away. On her counterpart, the shadow princess with the golden flute, pointed leaves and thorny vines pulled farther back from her face as the music continued, her nose and ears appearing at first bruised and bloody, then clearing, as though healing over days and weeks instead of seconds and minutes. Her eyes were next, the retracting thorns revealing dark red orbs that soon brightened with each successive trill, and pale white skin took on a healthy, rosy appearance. Jamie stared at the face of the other, a face that she could not help but recognize from the countless mirrors in which she'd seen it. Strength faltering, breath failing, and notes fading, Jamie also lost the tempo, her fingers no longer able to keep up. The other princess, the one who would now take her place in this realm, played on, drawing ever more strength from Jamie. The others came through then, breaking away from the dance. A mother, a father, a brother, all of them merely resembled the people she had lived with. Her world faded into shadow, and Jamie's flute slipped from her mouth. She barely had air left to gasp from the pain as the sharp thorns tightened around her face, piercing skin, jabbing into eyes and finally lips, before she felt herself pulled inexorably toward the dance within the gaping portal. The Knife, composed and performed by Tim Parker. Sinister Minutes is presented by Kurt Homan and Tim Parker. The musical score was composed and performed by Tim Parker. Our production team consists of Kurt Homan and Tim Parker. On behalf of everyone here at the Sinister Minutes podcast, namely Kurt Homan and Tim Parker, we thank you for listening, for joining us as we explore all the ways in which we are not okay. This audio program is copyright by Kurt Homan and Tim Parker under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.